Spring has sprung and a new open water season is upon us. We're going to talk about the 1-2 punch we use to reacquaint ourselves with our old favorite lakes on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast, brought to us, as always, by the folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. Visit them at sportsmans.com or any one of 140 plus stores nationwide, and they will ship directly to the store closest to you. And also, don't forget about the folks at Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado. They're outdoorsmen and women themselves, and they know what you need in a truck. So guys, here we are, April, and they say April showers bring May flowers or something to that effect. Well, it's snowing like crazy at my house right now. It's snowing a straight up whiteout, so it's a good day to be in the office getting some recording done, and that's what we're doing here today. And hopefully y'all are staying warm, but if you're bundled up and on the lake somewhere or on the river, then good for you. I'm glad to hear that. But I'm starting to get a lot of questions, and it's every year, this time of year. Typically they start sometime in March, and then they really get going in my home area in April. And the reason is this: a bunch of the reservoirs here in Colorado where I live will open to boating sometime between the middle of March and the middle of April. And my home lake included, we opened April 1st. And so people are just launching their boats for the first time of the season. Now, some of you may be in other areas of the country where they never either closed to boating or the lakes never freeze and you get to fish all winter. This podcast I want to talk about will still be applicable to you because it'll help you break down a lake you haven't been to, or a river, or a bite, I should say, more than the lake, that you haven't experienced in a while, or on a place that you haven't been in a while, things like that. So it's basically a two-pronged approach that I will use particularly this time of year on reservoirs and in boats, but I'll use it all the time when we're visiting new bodies of water, which we do in my line of work all the time. I visit lots of different bodies of water every year that I've never been to, and I will typically take this approach. And the reason I'm bringing it up right now is I encountered a guy on the bank here not too far from my house the other day, and he had two baits tied. He had two rods, which I was happy to see. I'm always a fan of having at least two rods, because if something goes wrong with one of those rods, you break it, you tangle it, whatever, that's step one. Nobody wants to have to go home early because one of their rods failed. If you have two, you're doing better. Second of all, and this is really the most important one, is it gives me a chance to have two different lures going at the same time, or two different baits, or whatever the case might be. And that's good because it allows you to quickly deduce what's going on. Now, there's a fundamental thing that I think needs to be considered, and that's what we're going to talk about right here. And this is where the inspiration came from the kid that I met the other day. And I say kid, he was probably, early 30s if I was guessing. And turns out he was a fan, but not a close fan. In other words, he knew of my show and what we do, but he didn't realize that he was talking to me at first when I first walked up there. And so he actually started quoting me, and that's what made me think about this podcast. And what he said to me was, I watched this guy on YouTube, and he says I should be fishing a jerkbait this time of year. And that guy he was referencing was me, and I agree with him. He should be throwing a jerkbait this time of year. I've advocated that for a long time. Just for the record, I've advocated throwing jerkbaits at all times of the year for a long time, but particularly right now. And it's because the water is cold, and the jerkbait will give you the ability to pause a bait and have it just sit there. That's the beauty of it. If you're going to throw a lure and you want that lure to sit still without moving, unless it's sitting on the surface or the bottom, it needs to be a suspending lure, and jerkbaits are one of the few genres that are commonly available that way, and that's what it's all about. So he quoted me saying that this guy advocated using a jerkbait. So I was just listening, and I didn't blurt out. I'm not in the mindset to go around and blurt out, what I do for a living or whatever. And I was just walking down the bank. And so he was close, but he was missing on one key thing. He had two rods, and he had two jerkbaits that were almost the same rigged. And when I say they were almost the same, they weren't the same brand, they weren't the same color, they weren't exactly the same size, but they were both suspending jerkbaits in a roughly natural color pattern. and I think he was doing himself a disservice. So after we talked for a little bit, he finally recognized my voice and said, wait a minute, wait. And then we had a whole big laugh and a big conversation. By the way, I love to talk with people while I'm out fishing. So if you ever see me out fishing somewhere, my truck's easy to spot, my boat's easy to spot, definitely say hi. I walk banks commonly and talk to people all the time. Doesn't matter where I am in my travels. I love to just randomly talk with people that are fishing, just see how they do it. It's part of the blessing of being in my line of work. But at any rate, what this kid was doing fundamentally wrong. Two jerkbaits that were so close that I would have been perfectly happy to fish either one of those jerkbaits. Where he is doing himself a disservice is he should have had a jerkbait on one rod, whichever one gave him the most confidence, and then some sort of a cleanup bait on the other rod. And that's going to be the gist of this podcast is my 1-2 punch. And invariably it's going to come down in a nutshell like this: a reaction bait and a finesse bait. Okay, now that could be a range of reaction baits, it could be a range of finesse baits, but you're not really going to see me on any given day, if I haven't been out on whatever lake or river or whatever it is a bunch recently to where I know better than that. If I'm just getting started for the year, or it's not a body of water I've fished since last year, or maybe I haven't fished in a few weeks, I don't know where there's fish, I don't have any information, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a reaction bait first, and I'm going to try to get the fish to show themselves. And then I'm going to cover a lot of water doing that. Let me just point that out. I'm just trying to get fish to show themselves. I'm not necessarily trying to catch them. Obviously, I'm trying to catch them. But the reaction bait has more to it than just catching them. And I'll get back to that in a second. But once I locate fish, I've got a fish to give me some clue as to where they are, then I will use the finesse bait to really try to mop up all the fish I can catch. Because one of the things you'll find during the shoulder seasons a lot of times is fish will group up. You've heard of it referencing as staging. You'll hear fish staging in certain areas. In my home lake, you'll get a whole bunch of, say, smallmouth bass that will stage on offshore rock piles and long tapering points, and they'll hang out there in groups until the water gets warm enough and the light periods get long enough, and they can pull up on the bank and start thinking about their spawn. Walleyes will do the same thing before they spawn. You'll get all kinds of species of fish that do that, and they'll be in groups until they can disperse. Not terribly dissimilar to something like wild turkeys. If you see turkeys, they're in big groups, and then when the weather finally breaks and it gets ready for the spring mating season, they'll break up into smaller groups and they'll go about their business, and again, they'll all get back together in the wintertime. And that is fundamentally the same thing that wintering herds of elk do, or fish, or anything else. And so what you'll find is groups of fish, as they get away from their winter doldrums, let's just say, and they will start staging in areas where they're going to go do other things heading into the spring and summer season. So what the gist of my deal is I will use a reaction bait of some sort, and I will get them to show me where they are, and then I will slow down and be very thorough and fish that area very thoroughly. Now, somebody's going to say, why don't you just go to the thorough bait and cover all of it? Well, I don't have time for that. I have low patience, call it ADD, whatever you want to call it. I want to locate fish and then catch them, as opposed to just fishing very thoroughly and slowly. And there are certainly days where just being thorough and methodical will definitely get you done. But for the most part, I find that if I can get away with a fast bait enough to get fish to show themselves, it will still be the great tool that actually allows me to catch the most fish, more than anything else. And I'll give you a quick example of this that I used to do when I was guiding full-time, particularly in the early days of my guiding. I would take a jerkbait, take the hooks off it, and just put some sticky tape on the bottom of it, so lead tape, so that the bait will still behave correctly, because when you take the hooks off, they'll float almost invariably. And then I would work that bait really fast with no hooks on it while guiding other clients that are throwing a finesse bait of some sort. And in those days, it was very commonly a tube jig or a gulp minnow for me. that I had either any of the clients throwing, and I would run the jerkbait to get fish to show themselves. And a few of them would bite it, but a lot of them would chase it. And that was the biggest key. And then I could have customers throw back in the areas where I use that really fast jerkbait to locate fish that were willing to go. And that kind of stuck with me for years and years. And to this day, it's something I do in my own angling, even though I'm not guiding these days. I will take a jerkbait or a crankbait or a lipless crankbait, some kind of a power fishing bait, maybe even a topwater bait, and then I will have a finesse bait that's ready to throw back as soon as I locate fish in the first place. And I want to reiterate that I don't have to get those fish to bite. I only need to get them to chase or swat or come look at the reaction style bait. And what do I mean by reaction bait? A reaction bait is basically anything that is fast, erratic, heavy vibrating or quickly vibrating, potentially a spinning blade, but most importantly, it's a bait that can be used to cover a lot of water in a hurry. So again, a jerkbait, a crankbait, a lipless crankbait, maybe a spinnerbait type bait or an inline spinner even, or anything like that I can cover a bunch of water with in a hurry and just try to get fish to bite. And so then the backup bait or the cleanup bait is typically going to be something that sinks a little bit slower, that doesn't give off any major flash or vibration or negative clues. In other words, it needs to look, in my case, smell or taste, and more or less be a better representation of what they may or may not be eating. And so hence the tube jig, fantastic all-around imitator. The Gulp minnow, which we talk about so much, or a power minnow, something like that. Something in that 1/8 ounce to jig range to maybe a quarter on the outside. And then a bait that's somewhere between, say, 2.5 and 4 inches long, depending again on potentially what species I'm talking about, and some other variables. It also might be, in the case particularly of largemouth, but also some smallmouth, a soft stick worm. You guys may think immediately of a Senko. For me, it's the General. It's a brand difference. I like the fact that the General's got power bait flavor in it and Maxent flavor in it, and so that's why I go that route. But that's my cleanup bait, and the good part about that bait is you can get a lot of bites with it. The bad part about that bait, or any of those baits I name in the finesse baits, is none of them are particularly quick to fish. And there's some nuances where, yeah, okay, you'll see me in summertime maybe snap jigging with a heavier finesse bait, something on the 1/4 ounce range like I was talking about, and I'll go quicker with it, but that's typically a warm water thing, and again, I know where there's fish. If I don't know where there's fish, I don't ever want to have to start with a slow bait, because if I do, it's going to take me the most amount of time to cover enough water to locate the fish. So my all-time favorite way to locate fish is without question a jerkbait. And the reason is it's extremely erratic. So fish can be really, really negative. They can be really lethargic and really off. And I can still get them to either follow or be curious about or fully bite or nip or whatever at a jerkbait. And that's the single biggest reason why I like that one the best. It's the erraticness. It's the crazy jerks that get their attention, and the sudden stop that typically gets them to actually bite or run right up on the bait and dare it to move again, which is really common scenario you'll see, particularly with smallmouth or largemouth bass. I've seen trout do it a bunch as well, where they'll get all excited about the jerkbait and they'll dart all around underneath it, and they just want it to move, and as soon as it runs from them, they'll grab it. But that's a great way to locate the bait. And there's a key thing here, locate the fish. And there's a key thing here that you have to keep in mind that part of this is being very careful to watch as that bait comes back to the boat or the bank that you're standing on, because it's going to behoove you to visually see fish following the bait. And that, in my experience, is harder for most people to do, because they're not good at looking for the nuances of the fish. And when I say they, I'm referencing guide clients. After 20 years of guiding, I would say a high percentage of my clients don't notice that a big old smallmouth chased their jerkbait right to the boat and then saw the boat and turned around and beeline the other way. Or same thing right to their feet. And part of that comes down to your glasses. I harp a lot on Costa sunglasses. I've been wearing Costa sunglasses since I was in college in the 90s. This is not a company that I endorse because they pay me to do it. This is a company because, and they have, just for the record, never paid me a dime. I wear their glasses because they have been fantastically performing glasses for me for my entire fishing career, both professionally and amateur before that. I want my Costas to have a very good quality lens for whatever light condition I'm dealing with in this scenario a lot, because I want to be able to see those subtle fish that come running up and look at the jerkbait. And a lot of times they're going to be a couple of feet under the bait, or maybe they'll be well behind the bait, maybe they'll be right on it. But either way, trout, smallmouth, largemouth, they'll run right up on the bait and look at it and not touch it in a lot of scenarios. And you need to spot those fish if you can, and your glasses will help. So for me, it's a green mirror lens most of the time, and it's a Sunrise Silver for the rest of the time, because one of those is a good bright lens. The green mirrors are very good for when it's really bright and sunny. The other one for when it's overcast. Those are the two lenses I fish 99% of the time, and most of the time when I'm using them to spot actual fish, it's in either this scenario right here where I'm drawing fish to the boat or the bank, as the case might be, or I'm watching underneath my bait out in a river, as the case might be. That's a scenario. Maybe a bed fishing scenario, which I do very, very little of, if any of these days. But when I did, again, it was all about the glasses for that as well. But the rest of the time, my glasses are more for being able to see underwater obstructions, rocks, cover, weed lines, or most importantly of all, my line on the surface. But I don't want to get too far from the main thing here, but you need to be able to watch the bait as it comes back to the boat or back to the bank and watch for feedback from the fish. Some of them you'll feel. You'll get nipped, okay? That's a good sign. Obviously, that's a good sign. Let's say that they choke, you say you're throwing a jerkbait and your fish chokes your jerkbait, okay? Keep throwing the jerkbait. You throw it another, few more times, no more feedback. Now you can put the jerkbait down and pick up the finesse rod and go back to throwing, go to throwing a finesse bait and try to mop up those fish that did get the jerkbait. Now here's the thing. Whether or not they bite the jerkbait dictates how many more times I throw it. In other words, if I throw, let's say I'm on a big rock point on my home lake, and there's a big tapering rock point, of which there's a gajillion of on my home lake, and most of the time there'll be at least a couple of fish on them somewhere. I run a jerkbait over the top of that bait, over the top of that point, and a big old smallie runs up and eats it right off the bat. Well, now I'm going to throw that jerkbait a few more times because I got a committed bite. I'm going to keep throwing that jerkbait until they prove to me they won't bite it. Conversely, if I throw that jerkbait over that point and a big old smallie runs up on it and doesn't bite it at all, but he runs up and looks at it, I'm not even going to throw it again. I'm going to drop it on the deck of the boat, and he's going to see that tube jig or that gulp minnow or that soft stick worm or whatever it is real quick as it goes back down. And then part of that's going to be the key is getting the bait back in there quickly in that scenario, because that fish is clearly interested. He's clearly alert enough to move around, but maybe he didn't fall for your trick. And that's the problem with power fishing. That's why I don't just stick with the reaction bait, because a lot of times a reaction bait's a great way to locate fish, but not necessarily catch them. Now, again, if he choked that jerkbait, came up and just smoked it, well, then I'm going to keep throwing it until they quit smoking it, because there are times when they'll just eat a reaction bait until the hooks fall off all day long. Those are fantastic days. Good for you. Those are the fantastic ones, but you don't get those very often. A lot of the time, they'll come run up on that bait and look at it. Again, they'll nip it, whatever, but they won't commit to it. Or you'll get fish that are barely hooked or hooked on the top of the head because they took a swing at it but didn't get a hold of it because it really wasn't what they wanted, but they'll come back for that finesse bait. And again, I already mentioned there's a bajillion of these tapering rock points on my home lake. If I got to go around and fish all of them with the finesse bait, it's going to take me a long time. And the scenario here we're working with is we don't know where there's a bunch of fish. If I know there's a bunch of fish on a point, I might just show up and throw only the finesse bait because it doesn't spook fish at all. It won't put them off. And the negative of a reaction bait of any kind, a lipless crankbait, a jerkbait, a crankbait, is the fact that fish will tune into it pretty quick. So you run that thing over the top of the point 3 or 4 times and they haven't got it, particularly if you've mixed your angles up like a good angler, like we talk about so much, so you're not making the same exact throw each time, but your angles are fundamentally different, then those fish, they're either going to want it or they're not. And you're not going to make enough casts to get them convinced that they do want it. But if you can just get them to show up or just give you some clue that they're there and that they're willing to play, it's going to help you a lot. Now, let me throw this out there. Somebody out there is going, well, why don't I just look at them on my sonar unit? Well, that's great. But first of all, it doesn't tell you what kind they are. And then two, unless, and this is something that's become huge in the last couple of years with live sonar, forward-facing sonar, you still need some way to get those fish to gauge those fish one way or the other and whether or not they're after your stuff. So just because you see fish on a point doesn't mean, on a traditional sonar. Now, if you see them on live sonar and they're following your jerkbait, but they're not biting it, now you know the finesse bait. And I want to throw out there real quick that every single pro bass guy in the universe at this point has got some sort of a little jig minnow that they're throwing because they've all figured out how much of a percentage, how high of a percentage of fish that follow right to the boat and don't bite. And those are the ones we couldn't see with our glasses previously. Now we can see them with live sonar. And I'm not going to go down a whole rabbit hole of live sonar right now. I have it, I use it, but I know a small percentage of you are the same as that. A high percentage of you do not. And a bunch of you are bank anglers, which means you have no sonar at all, which is why this is relevant to everybody involved. But the first thing, Joe Schmo Bass Pro does when fish don't bite his crankbait or his jerkbait or whatever, he's going to pick up that little minnow and throw it on his live sonar, and he's going to get those fish to bite. That's what I want you to do as well without the live sonar. So if I'm going to go walk the bank right now, and I'm going to go walk a bank right now, if the snow breaks this afternoon, I'm going to go fish this afternoon. I want to throw, say I'm on the bank. Today, my exact rigs will literally be a 3-inch or a 2.5-inch, 1/8-ounce power bait MaxScent tube in a natural color. And it will be in a fishier color. So maybe in one of the silver colors, the gray colors, the whitish colors, something like that. And that will be on my finesse rod. And then my second rod will, without question, have a Berkley hit stick on it. Why the hit stick? Because it's a floating jerkbait and it floats very slowly, and I'm going to go walk banks. So now I will use it to see if I can draw fish to give me some clue where they are, and then I will mop up with that tube jig behind it. And if they'll eat that hit stick, I'll keep throwing the hit stick. But the first time one of them refuses it, I will go after that. Go after them with that finesse bait. And I started to say a 3-inch tube. I used to throw the 3-inch power tube all the time. Please, Berkley, please bring that thing back. That was a fantastic tube. I love the standard 3-inch power tube, but they reduced them to 2.5 and made them fatter. Still an excellent bait, but that 3-inch tube is a great, great, great tube jig. And that's why I get the hang up there in my podcast. So I apologize for that, guys. But at the end of the day, the concept is pretty clear. Now, let's talk really quickly about a river scenario as well. The exact same thing will apply, only you'll get more follows typically in the river. So I could be throwing the same two baits I just mentioned, the hit stick and the MaxScent power bait tube, throwing that thing across the river, run the hit stick across the river, you'll get fish that'll chase it and then immediately go right back with the tube and mop up with that. But it's a 1-2 punch by having fundamentally different baits. And the biggest thing is you can excite them with the reaction bait, and then you can get them to bite with the finesse bait. And again, it could be a lipless crankbait, it could be a lipped crankbait, a square bill crankbait of some sort or whatever, and it could be a gulp minnow, could be a tube jig, could be a little short jig worm, maybe a 3 or 4-inch jig worm on a jig head, or it could be a soft stick worm, like I said, which could be wacky rigged or Texas rigged, depending on what kind of cover and things like that you have around. But that 1-2 punch is really the better way to rig two rods rather than having two really similar jerk baits. Even if they're an inch different in length and one's going 5 feet deeper and whatever, it's still fundamentally the same presentation, and you're doing yourself a disservice to go back and forth between those two unless you know for sure that they want to eat a jerk bait. And if you're 100%, if you've caught one's a fluke, two's a theory, and it could be a pretty good theory. By the time you catch 3 of them, it's for sure a pattern. If you get 3 of them to eat the jerk bait, keep throwing the jerk bait. But if 1 out of every 3 of them or 1 out of every 2 of them are just looking at it, following it, chasing it, not biting it, make sure you mop up with the finesse bait. And that will help you out a bunch. You'll cover more water, you'll have more fun, and it can be really fun. And then the last thing I'll throw out, I alluded to a topwater bait in the very beginning. This is not the time of year that I'm throwing topwaters. Now, if you live farther south, maybe you're in a different position, or you're in California, maybe you're in a different position. But for Western anglers that are dealing with lakes that are coming off of ice or that are very cold, even a Ozark-style angler, topwater is not the deal yet. But the 1-2 punch, once we get a little farther into spring, is really good because you'll get fish that'll come and look at a topwater and not get it, or they'll swirl at it and not get it, then they're throwing a finesse bait back to those fish as opposed to throwing the topwater back or another reaction bait. Better to throw a finesse bait back. So the 1-2 punch isn't just for locating fish. It can also be for mopping up with fish that were just a little too timid to bite whatever you were throwing. But you'll pretty much always see me have, if I'm on the boat, I'll have a throwback bait on the deck of the boat ready to throw if I'm throwing any sort of a reaction bait. Even if I'm really married to the reaction bait for the day, there'll still be a certain percentage of fish that I'll catch with a cleanup bait over the course of a day. Or if it's, again, where I haven't been out, I don't know where there's fish, or like the case in my home lake where the water's rising and they're moving like crazy, then I will use the 1-2 punch to locate them. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you would check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X, I would appreciate that very much. Especially check out our YouTube channel. Those are all at Fishful Thinker. Appreciate that. And we're airing still on Altitude Sports Entertainment and World Fishing Network 5 days a week. So check them out on cable wherever you watch. So I appreciate you listening. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.